use this as coming in sort of in a modular type of fashion. But you can get the same behavior coming in, not necessarily modularly, at least not exclusively so, but developing as a function of other related skills. So you need a certain level of executive function. You have to be able to inhibit certain behaviors. If you ask me, do I want, we might made a 3-year-old this nice sticker or this ugly sticker, and I say, oh, I want this nice sticker. You say, well, I'm going to take it, and you have the ugly one. If we do that 2 or 3 times to me, you think I'd catch on. But if I can't inhibit that response, I want the good one, I'm going to be in trouble. So you may need some basic executive function abilities. And as we see this shared attention abilities, we see it developing gradually over. Steve, you still there? Hear me?
I can still hear you, but I'm not getting any video from you.
Yeah. Okay. Same here. So maybe it'll pop back again.
Okay.
So this type of shared attention. I mean, mothers are doing this to babies probably from birth. But babies start responding back to mothers around 9 months, and we see this developing gradually from about 9 months, well, continuing up until into the 2nd year, the ability to share attention effectively, to point things out. And then we talk about theory of mind, understanding beliefs and desires. Young children seem to understand the notion other people can have different desires than mine, and later on they seem to understand they have different beliefs than mine. So rather than developing in a sort of modular and all or none fashion, these same types of abilities seem to develop in a more continuous fashion, dependent on context. So it's not that just one day they're here and the next day and the day before they weren't, but depending on how supportive the context is, children may display some more advanced theory of mind behaviors. But we're different in this way from any other species, seemingly any other species. From chimpanzees, most certainly. There's very little evidence that chimpanzees display can pass advanced theory of mind tasks that the typical 4-year-old human can, and they don't seem to engage in shared attention. Some of the work I worked for a while with enculturated chimpanzees that were raised as if they were human children. And we found, and David Bjorklund and Michael Tomasello and a few other people have found some differences in the social cognitive abilities of these human-reared apes that are more like that of 4-year-old children. They'll show true imitation, for example, and deferred imitation, where mother-reared chimpanzees show emulation or maybe mimicry. But other work by Mike Tomasello and some of his colleagues showed that these animals don't show any advantages in non-social cognition. So maybe part of the rearing environment gets apes to show some semblance of the advanced social cognition that human children spontaneously show, but we're not ready for a Planet of the Apes phenomenon yet.
Okay.
By any means.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so that's very interesting. Before we sign off here, tell me about your role in the development of evolutionary developmental psychology. What we see happening now, and in fact, I've been doing it myself, trying to develop an evolutionary cognitive neuroscience. But I'm interested in hearing other people's perspectives on developing their kind of evolutionary spin-offs of what we would otherwise consider standard psychological disciplines.
Yeah, well, it took some time, and it took some time to develop in my own thinking. But I think part of my first great insight, great for me, I'm not sure how great it was in the bigger worldview of things, is that aspects, basically natural selection operates at all stages of development. Mm-hmm. And it probably works especially strongly in the early stages, just getting you to adulthood. And this is a view that mainstream evolutionary psychologists, weren't considering at the time. But a corollary of that is that some aspects of immature behavior, immature functioning, characteristics of infants and young children, weren't just bad behavior or bad thinking that we have to get over on the way to adulthood, but may be adaptive in their own right. And this idea wasn't novel with me. It's called an ontogenetic adaptation, and people have been talking, and in some domains, been talking about it for a while. But I tried to apply it to a very specifically modern evolutionary psychological context, and that I think was my first insight and my first probably contribution to the field. But as I told you, I thought I'd write a paper or two on this and then get back to my important studies of children's memory strategy. It turned out that just applying a mainstream developmental psychological perspective, and I mentioned Gilbert Gottlieb, but I am an advocate of a developmental systems perspective, and this views development as the process of interacting systems from the genetic through the cultural. That this perspective is really at odds, or was at odds, with what was viewed as the mainstream perspective of evolutionary psychology, a very Richard Dawkins gene-centered perspective, and folks from a developmental point of view sort of see this as a form of genetic determinism. Of course, you tell that to a mainstream evolutionary psychologist, they get quite offended. And there was a lot of talking past one another. But what I thought mainstream evolutionary psychology lacked was a developmental model. How do you go from these evolved information processing mechanisms that are hypothesized and so central to evolutionary psychology that are supposedly genetic based to adult functioning? And you got to get there through development. And so I tried to apply, in much of my work, theoretical work anyway, I tried to apply a developmental systems type approach to explaining how we go from naturally selected mechanisms that have some genetic basis to them. How do they get expressed in the phenotypes of adults? And for that, you need a developmental model. Mm-hmm. So that has been, and I think that perspective in one form or another has been adopted by people who call themselves evolutionary developmental psychologists. There's still controversies, of course, but it's not nearly as controversial as it once was. And I think more and more people don't see a contradiction between development and evolution. I mean, as you know, the modern synthesis essentially said development is very important for the individual, but without consequence, really, for evolution, because what happens during the development of the individual doesn't get into the next generation, doesn't get into the germ cells. So development becomes an epiphenomenon. Mm-hmm. But if you take a little different look at it, that evolution is not simply the expression of genes, but the expression of genes in usually a species typical environment over time, and that genes get expressed in environments differently in different environments. You see a very important role for development, and especially for species like Homo sapiens, where we have such a plastic brain. We have the ability to change our thinking and our behavior. We're required to, essentially. That's our claim to fame in the animal world.
Right.
Evolution, natural selection has selected for this plasticity as much as they've selected for opposable thumbs or upright walking.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I'm having a hard time teaching my evolutionary psychology class about this right now, only because they see a little bit of odds with the developmental perspective, and then I come in and talk about genetics, and now I say, well, and what I try to tell them to do is think about the organism is also an environment, and therefore genes are going to be expressed differentially according to predictable or recurrent types of things that you experience during your development. And one of the classic examples is that sexual selection acts heavily during the reproductive years of a development of an organism. Uh-huh. In other words, like, we don't get facial hair when we're 2 because it has no sexual repercussions when we're 2. But when we're 15 and 20, secondary sexual characteristics are selected because of sexual selection. Right. So it's really interesting to think of this. Well, David, I can't thank you enough. This has been one of the most interesting podcasts that I've had.
Thank you, Steve. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, so have I. I really have. So perhaps I'll get back with you in a couple weeks, maybe next term or something, and we can do this again. In the meantime, what I'll do is I'll pass this along to the editors, and it will be up on the website in a couple weeks, and I'll send you that information.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks for chatting with me, David. Have a good
My
one.
pleasure, Steve. Yeah, and enjoyed it. Good luck with the project.
Thank you.